League of Nations: Birth, Mission and Methods. The League of Nations was the brainchild of President Woodrow Wilson, who strongly believed in the power of diplomacy to prevent war. It was established in 1920 by the Paris Peace Conference with 42 founding member states. Wilson envisioned the League as a kind of world parliament where countries could come together to discuss their problems and find solutions rather than conflict. Wilson believed that if European nations had taken the time to engage in dialogue in 1914, the outbreak of World War I could have been avoided. In a speech delivered in Indiana in September 1919, he declared, "If there had been 9 days of discussion, Germany would not have gone to war." The League's guiding principles were laid out in its covenant, which defined its main aims: to discourage aggression between nations, to encourage cooperation on global issues, to promote disarmament, to oversee peace treaties and monitor the mandate states, to improve living and working conditions around the world. Wilson's idealistic vision for the League of Nations was far removed from the political realities of uniting the world's nations under a single organization. While he imagined a body where all countries, large and small, would have an equal voice, many of the more powerful nations were unwilling to accept this. Countries like Britain, France, and Italy feared that their own national interests could be undermined by smaller nations acting together and outvoting them on key issues. Britain, France, Italy, and Japan were granted permanent seats on the Council, giving them greater influence and control. The structure of the League reflected that the League was built largely by the victors of World War I. The League's methods of resolving conflicts if two countries came into conflict were arbitration, moral condemnation, economic sanctions, and military intervention. If the members of the League worked together and the countries involved respected the decisions of the League, then these methods would be effective. The problem was that many countries pursued self-interest rather than followed the decisions of the League. Each of the League's methods for resolving conflicts had their weaknesses. Arbitration worked if the countries involved in the dispute were willing to work with the League. If they weren't, then the League couldn't arbitrate. Moral condemnation worked if the country that was deemed to be in the wrong cared what the League said. If not, then it was ineffective. Economic sanctions had the power to punish aggressors, but often countries were more worried about the impact of the sanctions upon their own economies and were unwilling to impose sanctions which could hurt them as well. Finally, there was military intervention. But the League did not have an army, and countries were unwilling to lend their own forces to police the world. Possibly the biggest blow to the effectiveness of the League of Nations was the absence of the United States. Although President Woodrow Wilson had been the driving force behind the League's creation, there was strong opposition to US membership at home. Many Americans favoured an isolationist approach, wanting to avoid being drawn into future international conflicts and instead focus on domestic issues. The heavy cost of World War I, both in lives and money, for a war far from American soil, had left the public wary of further entanglements. In the US Senate, opposition centred on the fear the League's principle of collective security could force the country into war without congressional approval. Led by Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, many Republicans demanded changes to the League's terms that would ensure only Congress had the power to declare war. However, Wilson stubbornly refused to compromise. Despite his nationwide campaign to rally support, the treaty was defeated every time it was brought to vote in the Senate. As a result, the United States never joined the League. Without the military and financial power of the US behind it, the League's authority was greatly weakened. Its main tools, moral condemnation and economic sanctions, lacked real force without American support. Additionally, two other major powers, Germany and the Soviet Union, were excluded from the League in its early years. Many major powers would ultimately leave the League over conflicts, weakening its efforts. Germany joined the League in 1926, but withdrew in 1933 after Hitler took power. Japan left in 1933 following the League's condemnation of its invasion of Manchuria. The Soviet Union joined in 1934, but was expelled in 1939 for invading Finland, and Italy left in 1937 after facing sanctions over its invasion of Abyssinia. The League of Nations was a grand and ambitious project, with Woodrow Wilson awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his efforts to secure world peace. But the League is ultimately remembered more for its failures than for its achievements. The failings of the League's ability to enforce its will on aggressors is often part of questions related to the League of Nations.